An Oklahoma father has killed his wife and 3 of his kids, leaving his 10-year-old to find them. Around 9:30 yesterday morning, police responded to a call from a young boy who said that everyone in his home was dead. Officers described it as nothing short of a massacre, with Jonathan shooting Lindsay, Ethan, Dylan, and Lucas, but leaving his 10-year-old unharmed. Now, according to police, sometime overnight, Jonathan and Lindsay became involved in an altercation. Jonathan then, quote, armed himself with a gun and he shot her several times. At that point, he reportedly started going through the house and systematically killing their children. There was actually just one child found in his bed, with investigators saying that they were hunted down and killed. Now, aside from that, we know investigators didn't find any signs of a struggle, and that ultimately they found 2 bodies upstairs and 2 bodies downstairs. They say that why the youngest wasn't killed remains a mystery, and that he was released to other family members at the scene. There were also no previous calls to the residence or reports of domestic violence, and it seems like everyone is wondering what happened. Lindsay Candy was known to be a wonderful mother, and 18-year-old Dylan just graduated from the local high school last year. Ethan was a 9th grader there, and Lucas was a 6th grader at the intermediate school. And anyone with information that could help this investigation is asked to contact the homicide tip line at the number above. The 18-year-old has been killed the day after graduating high school, and this is what we know so far. On Friday night, Lily celebrated with her friends and family, but the very next day, she was shot by another graduate. Around 9 p.m., we know there was a group here just hanging out when a witness saw 18-year-old Matthew Raphael pull a gun from the trunk of his car. Sources actually vary on what exactly happened next, but he ended up shooting Lily in the shoulder, reportedly not thinking that the gun was loaded. Now, as we know, this same witness immediately took Lily to the hospital and called 911 along the way. The dispatcher then actually instructed them to pull over on the side of the road and wait for EMS assistance. Shortly after, EMS did show up and took Lily to Vanderbilt Medical Center, but she tragically died of her injuries. Now, as for Matthew, he had reportedly driven to another hospital looking for Lily, and that's where he was arrested. He again reportedly admitted to police that he was the shooter, but said that he thought the gun was unloaded and that it was unintentional. It's also not clear how the teens knew each other, but Matthew had graduated from Ravenhood High School, which is about 10 miles away. As of today, Matthew was charged with criminal homicide, but he was actually released on Tuesday on a $150,000 bond. And as for Lily, she was known to be an incredible friend and to light up every room that she walked into. I currently can't find a GoFundMe that we can donate towards, but if anyone knows of one, please let us know in the comments. A massive search is underway for a father of 4 accused of killing his wife. On Sunday morning around 9 a.m., Breezy and Aaron Pennington's 4 kids showed up at their neighbor's house in Gardner, Massachusetts. At ages 2, 5, 7, and 9, they were reportedly scared because they couldn't find their father and their mother was crying in her bedroom. As we know, police were at the scene in 5 minutes, but tragically it was too late. They went upstairs and found that Breezy wasn't crying anymore. The 30-year-old was pronounced deceased from a gunshot wound to the face at 9:30 a.m. Now, as confirmed by surveillance footage, Aaron had actually left the house that morning at 8:50. And then on Monday night, his unoccupied BMW was found in the woods of a Boy Scout camp 4 miles away. In what is now a manhunt, police say they are searching all of 400 acres to find Aaron. That he has a military background, spent the past 7 years in active service, and knows how to survive in these woods. Aside from that, court documents have revealed that Breezy had been saving up money to leave Aaron and move to Texas with their kids. Her sister says that on the outside he's a very nice person, but has been struggling with mental health issues that just kept getting worse. He also didn't have a license to carry a gun in Massachusetts, but Breezy reportedly kept one for her own safety. Today, the Penningtons' kids remain under custody of the state, with police asking anyone who sees Aaron to not approach him, but immediately call 911. Breezy was, quote, the funniest person. She had the best/worst dark humor. She loved true crime and, most importantly, her babies. She brought light to everyone that knew her, cheered for everyone, and made motherhood seem effortless. Prosecutors have announced that they will seek the death penalty for the murder of Lauren Heike. If you've been following, you know that on April 28th, Lauren was followed, chased, and stabbed on a North Phoenix hiking trail. It wasn't until 24 hours later when a 911 caller reported a possibly deceased female lying in the desert area behind her house. As we know, when officers were en route to the scene that morning, they actually received another request to check on a young esthetician who had missed work. The call had come from one of Lauren's friends, and she was even more concerned that her phone still showed she was on the trail she hiked yesterday. When police did get to this area off the main trail, they tragically found it was Lauren and that she was the victim of a homicide. Blood, ripped clothing, and the personal belongings she dropped would horribly show the exact path where she ran for her life. Based on the evidence, it was clear Lauren was chased down the Route 11 trail before being viciously attacked from behind. She was repeatedly stabbed but tried her hardest to put up a fight, with defensive wounds and the chase even going over a barbed wire fence. Investigators tragically believe that she may have eventually escaped, but her injuries were too severe to keep going. From here, police obtained surveillance footage from the area, and chillingly, they could see that someone had been following a couple minutes behind Lauren as she walked down the trail. They also managed to get a DNA sample from her shoe, and that is what turned up 22-year-old Zion Teasley in court records. He lived just a mile from the scene and was recently arrested for armed robbery, but was listed as a medium-low risk to reoffend and got a plea deal. With that, police went to Zion's former workplace, and they confirmed he was the man from the footage. They also said he was recently fired for being aggressive towards female employees, and that he was known to carry a pocket knife with a 3-inch blade. Again, as we know, on May 6th, Zion was finally taken into custody. He reportedly immediately admitted he was at the scene, and when asked about Lauren, quote, said he recognized her from the news and that he wanted to look like her. Officials wrote in the arrest affidavit that he struggled to admit Lauren was murdered and instead talked about his life growing up as a Christian and his internal struggles with his sexuality. Today, prosecutors seek the death penalty against Zion, who again was already on parole and actually met with his probation officer between killing Lauren and being arrested. He pleads not guilty to the charges against him, and Lauren continues to be missed by her friends and family. This case continues to be one that young women everywhere should be aware of. The McGuad family adopted an orphan, but then she killed their children. Raised in the Philippines in 2021, Gwen McGuad made a new friend. Her name was Janice, and when Gwen asked her about her parents, she said she didn't have any. We now know that 8 years before, a woman had actually stumbled upon 8-year-old Janice all alone on a ship. She knew her name, but claimed she had no memory of her life prior to that day. In the end, no one claimed Janice, and she was placed under custody of the Department of Social Welfare. Then, at 17, a family near the town of Malang hired her as a live-in nanny. She was out with them when she met Gwen. As the girls got closer that summer, Gwen and her younger brother Lewis sat their parents down and pleaded for them to adopt Janice. They've said that at first they were skeptical. They worked as educators, so there was limited income, and they didn't have an extra bedroom. But then Lewis offered up his room. Just being the people they were, they agreed to take her in, believing that perhaps this was their purpose on Earth. In the months leading up to the murders, the McGuads enrolled Janice in school, and she took their last name. The morning of December 10th was just like any other. Cruz and Lavella made the kids breakfast and then headed to work as a school teacher and principal. It was 2:58 p.m. when Janice began to make a series of disturbing posts from her Facebook. She claimed that 3 men had broken into the house and she was hiding under her bed. Immediately, Cruz rushed home, where he found his biological children deceased in the living room. Autopsies reported that altogether they were beaten, strangled, and stabbed more than 70 times. Interestingly, when Janice came downstairs, she was completely unharmed and soaking wet. She said that after the attackers left, she'd taken a shower to calm herself down. While there was a lot wrong with Janice's story, a plastic bag found in a creek near the home sealed her fate. It appeared the killer threw it in thinking it would wash away, but it didn't. Inside was a bat with fingerprints belonging to Janice. When confronted, Janice immediately broke down and admitted she'd carried out the plan with a still unidentified 17-year-old boy. That she killed Gwen out of jealousy, and while stabbing her, she screamed out, quote, "This is just a dream. I am still going to be a doctor. I don't know what I did wrong to you. Janice, I love you very much." Ultimately, both Gwen and the boy were sentenced to 32 years. It turns out Janice did have parents and 3 siblings, and to this day it remains unclear whether she was abandoned on that ship. Blake Linkus is unbelievably out on bail after strangling his ex-girlfriend. If you've been following, you know that last June, Natalie was murdered on her senior trip to Myrtle Beach. Her ex-boyfriend has already confessed to locking himself in a room with her body, but now he's home under the supervision of his parents. We now know that on the night of June 6th, the group of Ohio graduates all left their Airbnb to go out to a local club. But according to one of Natalie's friends, she ended up not feeling well and returned back to the house early with Blake. By 10:45, 2 more of their friends had returned, and they actually had to go around the back because the couple wouldn't answer the front door. Now, after managing to get inside, we know these friends heard 3 loud thuds, but when they checked Natalie and Blake's room, that door was locked too. They likely assumed it was nothing and carried on with their night, not realizing something awful had happened. Everyone else in that house was reportedly in bed by 7 a.m., but just 2 hours later, they would all wake up to a nightmare. Again, as we know, at 9 a.m., Blake bursted out of the bedroom, bleeding from a self-inflicted stab wound to the chest. He was reportedly just screaming that Natalie wasn't waking up, so of course, 2 of her friends rushed in there to find her on the floor. They immediately called 911 and tried to give her CPR, but it was clear that they were too late. Their friend was cold and stiff to the touch, and even EMS could reportedly tell that she'd been strangled the night before. Now from here, police conducted their initial questioning, and within 2 days, they arrested Blake. He reportedly immediately confessed to killing Natalie after an argument, with them recently breaking up after a 3-year relationship. The couple had seemingly gotten on good enough terms to go on this trip together, but according to one of Natalie's friends, he threw her across the room at one point, and they were arguing the night before over another guy. Now, as for the case today, we know Natalie's parents initially pleaded with the judge to not let their daughter's killer be free. They wrote an entire statement about how this should be an easy decision, but ultimately, the court disagreed. It was ruled that Blake could post a $150,000 bond, and again, he's just required to be on house arrest with his parents. The judge has actually said, quote, "There is nothing in Mr. Linkus's background, young though he is, that has indicated he is a person of violence. In this particular case, he has not denied responsibility. He has acknowledged it, he's recognized it to the best he can." Natalie was known to live her life to the fullest, with a contagious laugh and a personality that could bring anyone out of their darkest days. If you would like to donate towards her GoFundMe, the link will be in my bio. Trial has officially begun for the murder of mom of 5, Jennifer Dulos. If you've been following, you know Jennifer vanished from her Connecticut home in the midst of a years-long custody battle with her husband. She was last seen dropping her kids off at school on January 24th, but then she didn't show for her 11 a.m. doctor's appointment. Jennifer's friends ultimately reported her missing that night, with police arriving at the scene to find the floors and walls of her garage covered in blood. Now from here, police obviously caught up on the fact that Jennifer's husband was having an affair, and she was renting this house to get both she and her kids away from his abuse. They decided to obtain surveillance footage from the neighborhood, and that is when they saw something chilling. Someone had showed up to Jennifer's house on a bike that morning, and he was waiting to kill her in the garage when she got back from dropping her kids at school. As we know, over 2 hours later, Jennifer's car left the house again, but police don't think she was the one driving. They tracked her vehicle down to find it abandoned in a local park, and after checking surveillance there, they also found what appeared to be a getaway truck. The thought is that it was previously driven there to transport Jennifer's body, and with everything considered, police began tracking her husband and his girlfriend's movements. As police would learn, that same night, Fotis and Michelle were seen in the getaway truck dumping black trash bags into 30 separate dumpsters. Authorities immediately went to these locations, and they found bloody clothing, zip ties, and cleaning supplies that all had Jennifer's DNA. With that, on June 1st, Fotis and Michelle were officially charged with tampering with evidence. Without a body, there just wasn't enough for a murder charge, and they both posted bail. As investigators continued to build their case in 2019, they executed search warrants at the property where Jennifer previously lived with Fotis and the kids. There, they first found what they have come to call alibi scripts. 2 scripted documents written by Fotis and Michelle that detailed what they would tell police they did on the day Jennifer disappeared. They also found proof that the couple had paid in cash to have the getaway car professionally cleaned. There was still no body though, so in September, they were again both charged with tampering with evidence and both posted bail. From here, things were actually quiet for a few months, but come January of 2020, the couple was finally charged with Jennifer's murder. I can't begin to understand why this was an option, but for the 3rd time, they posted bail. Fotis was due to show up in court on January 28th, but he didn't, and police found him unresponsive at his house. He had poisoned himself with carbon monoxide and ultimately passed away on January 30th, 2020. That leaves Michelle and actually one of Fotis' friends to face charges in this case. Today, Michelle stands trial for conspiracy to commit murder, and while her story has changed a million times, she maintains she has no idea what happened to Jennifer or where she could be. Jennifer, of course, remains missing, and a judge actually declared her deceased earlier this week. I will keep you guys updated, but may this hopefully lead to some answers or justice in this case.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
After 4 years, we finally know more about what happened to Suzanne Morphew. If you've been following, you know Suzanne seemingly vanished while riding her bike on Mother's Day. Her husband Barry was initially arrested, but without a body, prosecutors dropped the charges against him. They then found her in the desert about 7 months ago, with her autopsy just reporting that she was murdered and she had animal tranquilizers in her system. Now with this, officials say that back on Mother's Day weekend, both of the couple's daughters were camping out of town. Suzanne had also just told Barry that she wanted to leave him, but when he came home from running errands that Saturday, he reportedly got confirmation of her affair. You see, that afternoon, Suzanne's last proof of life came at 2:03 p.m. and a selfie that she sent to a man who they both went to high school with. She never responded to his message at 2:44, which is the same time that Barry's phone showed him running back and forth around their house. He would later claim that he was chasing chipmunks with a tranquilizer gun, but it's alleged that he was actually chasing his wife. Now at this point, around 3 p.m., Barry would turn his phone into airplane mode for nearly 8 hours. He again said he was just enjoying time with Suzanne, but officials think he hid her and created a false alibi. They actually think he set everything up to make it seem like she would go missing on a bike ride. That night, Barry maintains they both went to bed around 8, while his truck would show that it reversed up and towards the house at 9:30. And then at 4 a.m., he was just out driving, later claiming that he was chasing bull elk down the road. Now, as we know, Suzanne wouldn't be there later that Sunday when her daughters came home to wish her a happy Mother's Day. With her bike gone, the thought was that she was injured somewhere, but as panic set in for her girls, their dad actually wasn't home. Around 5 a.m., Barry had turned his phone back on, and he left for a work trip nearly 3 hours north in Denver. You can see he was first seen there around 10 a.m., dumping tranquilizer darts into dumpsters, and then walking into his hotel, where he stayed until he learned that his wife was missing. Now, when Barry did come home from work that night, he would be informed that Suzanne's bike had already been found off a local road. He would repeatedly blame her alcohol problems and suggest a mountain lion attack, but despite having their daughter's support, he was eventually charged with her presumed death. This charge was of course then dropped, but prosecutors always said that when they found her, they could charge him again. And they actually found her this past September. On the 22nd, we know investigators were actually out on another case when they discovered Suzanne's remains. And you can see this is in an area east of the family's home, and not up near Denver where Barry was working and where she was thought to be. It also does seem that it's been too long to determine an exact cause of death, but we do know she had those animal tranquilizers in her system. This is of course meant to sedate wildlife, and we also know that Barry had some. As of today, it seems investigators will keep on Barry, but he is still a free man with his kids. And I will just say there are hundreds of pages of court documents detailing the abuse that Suzanne was a victim to. I'm going to tag that in my bio for anyone who is interested, but may we all hope that these new details give investigators what they need. There are finally updates in the case of the father who drove his family off a cliff. If you've been following, you know the Patels survived crashing 250 feet off the San Mateo coast. Dharmesh Patel has since been charged with attempted murder, but last week, his wife pleaded with the court to let him come home. She said that he's her best friend, their family needs him, and that their kids are crying and asking why he's not there yet. It's actually being argued that he's a great candidate for mental health diversion because this was, quote, a one-time psychotic episode. If the court agrees, he will be put on a 2-year treatment plan. Now, still today, prosecutors are arguing that Dharmesh woke up that morning knowing he would kill his family. They reportedly all had plans that day to drive to his brother's house, but he initially said that when they got on the Pacific Coast Highway, their Tesla, quote, began to feel different. He said he was actually just trying to pull over and check a flat tire when they went over, and that just happened to be in a spot where dozens of people have taken their lives. Now, as we know, according to everyone else's account, what Dharmesh said is not what really happened. That morning, police have footage of him speeding down the highway before suddenly pulling a U-turn. That U-turn would have put him here on the side of the road closest to the water, and no one saw any brake lights as he drove right over the edge. These same witnesses called 911 around 10 that morning, and first responders could not believe it when they saw movement in the back seat. Now, knowing that, an entire rope system was set up from the highway, but it actually took hours before anyone could reach the family. As soon as they were finally able to, Neha Patel reportedly just started screaming, quote, "He drove off, he's depressed, he's a doctor. He said he was going to drive off the cliff. He drove off on purpose." From here, the entire family was taken to the hospital, with experts crediting luck and the Tesla itself for their survival. And as for the injuries, it's actually unbelievable. Their 7-year-old walked away with nothing but bruises, but it also wasn't like things were going back to normal. And that same week, Dharmesh Patel was officially charged with the attempted murder of his family. And the immediate reaction was that it must have been an accident, with footage of him gifting neighbors flowers just days before. Then his attorney came forward and said his wife didn't want him in prison, and she just wanted him back home. Again, she has just pleaded with the court, and several doctors actually testified in her favor. Over the past year, Dharmesh has reportedly seen many specialists who say this was, quote, a psychotic episode that stemmed from his fears over current headlines in the world. And they say that his fears over his children had something to do with the news on Jeffrey Epstein, and again, that he would be a great addition to this new program. And basically, this program was introduced in 2018 as a treatment for defendants who are diagnosed with a mental illness that has a direct connection to the crime that they committed. It's not applicable for those accused of, quote, serious felonies such as murder, but Dharmesh is charged with attempted murder. Now from here, a judge will ultimately decide if Dharmesh poses a public safety threat and if mental health contributed to his decision. We basically have the defense and the family siding with this diversion program, but the prosecution disagrees and believes this should be settled in court. New details have come out in the terrifying case of 6-year-old Alicia McPhail. If you've been following, you know Alicia was abducted from her bed by 16-year-old Aaron Campbell. He's just been moved to an adult prison where he says he is terrified that he'll be targeted for what he did to her. You see, on July 2nd, Alicia was actually on vacation, visiting her dad on the Isle of Bute. He and his girlfriend reportedly watched Peppa Pig with her before bed, and then like everyone there, they left the house key in the front door. Now meanwhile, about 5 minutes away, then 16-year-old Aaron was celebrating the end of exams. He had about 15 friends over that night, but by 12:30, he reportedly got into a fight with his mom, and his attitude changed. One of his friends actually came up to his room to check on him, but he just insisted. After going to get some substances, he'd be fine. His friends then ended up leaving his house, and he texted the couple who was known to sell him said substances. And that was Alicia's 26-year-old father and his girlfriend. As we know, at 1:46, Aaron texted Robert like he always did, but with no response after 6 minutes, he decided to head over there himself. He then walked the 5 minutes to Alicia's grandparents' house where he lived, and armed with a kitchen knife, he simply walked inside. Alicia's bedroom was actually the closest room to the door, and as soon as he saw her, he, quote, knew that he had to kill her. From here, Aaron picked Alicia up, and he started walking with her along the shore. She actually woke up at one point and asked what was going on, but he told her he knew her dad and was just taking her home. Instead, he took her to the old site of the Kyles of Butte Hotel, where he inflicted 117 catastrophic injuries. Tragically, a coroner would note that he violently shook her, and he took his time. Now, come the next morning, when Alicia wasn't in her bed, the entire town started searching. And then, around that same time, her dad and his girlfriend of course saw that they had this missed text from Aaron. They called him back that morning to ask what he needed and to see if he could help look for Alicia, but he responded, quote, "It doesn't matter anymore. And oh damn, I'm sure she's not gone too far. Now by 8 that morning, a local searcher found Alicia's body, along with all of her clothing that had been thrown into the sea. Her funeral was held about 5 days later, but her mom wasn't the only mother there upset. Erin's mom was there too, and she actually wanted to do anything she could to help. So she offered to check her family's security cameras. Now when Jeanette checked these cameras, her heart sank, because there was her son leaving at the same time Alicia disappeared. She immediately went to ask him about it, but he must have had a good explanation. She ended up taking that footage and giving it to police in an effort to clear his name. As we know, while police initially brought Erin in as a witness, he eventually confessed to the crime in detail. He was charged with murder on July 4th, but as if it couldn't get worse, he then said he was quite satisfied with what he'd done. He was then legally disowned by his parents, and for the first time in Scottish history, a judge ruled to release the juvenile's name. In the end, Erin was sentenced to 27 years in prison, telling psychologists that he'd been having dark fantasies for years. He's already been hospitalized several times from attacks at the Young Offenders Institution, which may explain why he was training every day for this move to adult prison. Again, reports state that he knows he'll have a target on his back for what he did to Alicia. Elizabeth Fritzl's father may be released from prison after being ruled to no longer be a threat to society. Elizabeth went missing just after she turned 18, and her father managed to convince both her mom and the police that she had run away. The truth was that he was holding her captive in their basement, and she gave birth to 7 of his children down there over the next 24 years. On August 28, 1984, Joseph lured Elizabeth downstairs under the guise of helping him carry a 3-by-2-foot door. His family thought he'd spent the past 6 years down there building a bomb shelter, but really, this door was the last thing he needed to seal his underground prison for Elizabeth. As she held the door frame in place for him, he shoved her inside, and he never let her back out. Up until Elizabeth was 22, she was kept in complete isolation and assaulted by her father on a daily basis. It was at this point in 1988 when she gave birth to her first 2 kids, Kirsten and Stefan, with just a pair of dirty scissors. She did her best to raise them underground, while her other siblings who you see here were able to go on vacations and live their normal lives. At 26, Elizabeth went on to give birth to her 3rd child, Lisa, and she actually didn't stay downstairs. In May of 1993, Elizabeth's mom found her in a cardboard box on their front porch. With her came a note addressed from Elizabeth explaining that this was her little girl who she just couldn't care for. Of course, Joseph was the one to place the box there, but to Elizabeth's mom, this was confirmation that she was alive and she really did run away. She took her granddaughter in and raised her with her husband, completely unaware that he was really the father. Now, about a year later, when Elizabeth would have been 27, her 4th child, Monica, showed up on the porch just like Lisa did. And then 2 years after that, baby Alexander showed up too. Altogether, Elizabeth had these 7 children in that basement, with 3 of them raised upstairs thinking their mother abandoned each of them at birth, and the other 3 held captive in the basement with her. Tragically, the 7th child, Michael, died just after he was born, and Joseph incinerated his body. As we know, in 2008, the 3 kids upstairs are teenagers, and Elizabeth is 42 years old and still with the others in the basement. The youngest with her was 5 at this point, but her oldest, Kirsten, was 19 now, and she had never seen the sun. She became incredibly ill that spring, and for the first time ever, Joseph agreed that she seriously needed medical attention. On April 19th, Kirsten alone went to the hospital with Joseph, and he told medical staff that his missing daughter had just left her with him. She had life-threatening kidney failure, and it was clear that she had never seen a doctor in her life. The staff became suspicious, and they ultimately contacted police. With this report, authorities broadcasted a public appeal for the missing mother to come forward and provide Kirsten's medical history. And then, possibly in a panic, Joseph suddenly released her and the 2 other kids from the cellar. He told his wife that after 24 years, Elizabeth had decided to come home. After being let out, Elizabeth got Joseph to take her to the hospital, and one of the doctors tipped off police that she was there. Joseph was arrested on hospital grounds, and Elizabeth refused to say anything until she was promised that she would never have to see him again. They also gave the kids DNA tests, and they were able to confirm all 6 of them were Elizabeth and her father's children. In 2009, Joseph was sentenced to life, with the possibility of parole in 2024. Again, unbelievably, new psychiatric reports have just ruled that he is no longer a threat to society. And for those wondering about the kids, they, quote, have new identities and are living with Elizabeth in an undisclosed location in Austria, only known as Village X. They're reportedly free and back together, but each have their own struggles adjusting to society.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
A new interview has only left more questions about what happened to Harley Dilley. On the Friday before winter break, Harley vanished on his walk to school in Port Clinton, Ohio. 4 weeks later, his body was found just 400 feet from his home. Seemingly that entire time that everyone was searching searching for him, he was in the chimney of the house right across the street. We now know that on December 20th, Harley's school did call his mom to say he never showed, but her voicemail was full and she didn't call back. She and her husband reportedly just assumed he was at a friend's that entire weekend, with it being 41 hours before they contacted police. Now, on Saturday night, officers wasted no time going by all of Harley's friends' places and crossing them off the list. The searches continued as Christmas came and went, and with still no leads in January, both the FBI and the CBI were brought in. According to the local police chief, one of the CBI agents immediately requested to see Harley's neighborhood. He took her over there, and again right away, she inquired about this green two-story house across the street. The chief explained that it was an empty summer home with no signs of forced entry, and that their scent dogs didn't pick anything up outside. With that, still, this agent was adamant that they restart at square one and take a second look for Harley. That's exactly what they did, and while they found that the windows on this house were secure, there was also a lockbox on the front door and clearly ongoing renovations. The police chief actually called the owners, and after explaining the situation, the elderly couple was of course happy to let them take a look around. Upon going upstairs, officers would find a red puffer coat, a jersey, and a pair of boys' glasses on one of the bedroom floors. All of this was directly under a vent hole, which would have opened up to the house's chimney. And while in a lot of cases we would see these chimneys go down to the first floor and open up to a fireplace, that wasn't the case here. There used to be a wood-burning stove there on the second floor, so the vent hole was used for heat ventilation through the chimney. Whoever removed that stove, and whenever they did, they bricked off the chimney completely, so it did not go down to the first floor. Now, initially with these findings, police didn't know what to think, because Harley being in there wasn't really plausible, and there weren't any smells of decomposition. They ended up putting a camera in the vent hole just to take a look, and when they still couldn't see anything, one of the officers made the decision to reach his hand inside. Horribly, he felt what he has described as a head of human hair. With that, and brick by brick, police dismantled the chimney and found Harley in the 9 by 13 inch opening. He was positioned with his head tilted towards the roof and had tragically died of positional asphyxiation. It was like any smell of decomposition had been locked in that chimney, and the coroner almost immediately ruled that it looked like an accident. As we know, today police believe that Harley, quote, climbed up the house's antenna tower that morning and one way or another slid down into the chimney and got stuck. They actually think he was trying to hide and not go to school, that he first got stuck right above the vent hole and he was taking his clothes off in an attempt to make himself smaller. They think this worked and he slid down further just to get stuck again where the chimney was bricked off. Now, of course, on the other side of this case, there's the belief that what happened to Harley was not an accident. You see, back before Harley disappeared, he had this YouTube channel where he would reveal his address and sometimes do live streams without a shirt. This attracting a predator could be one angle, but also just listen to this clip from one of his videos.
We argued for about a good 5 minutes. And then she snapped, and she locked me out of the house. So right now, I'm outside. Yep, the house is locked. It is 3:30. I haven't ate anything. If you knew what was going on in my life. It's just been a horrible week.
So from that, it's clear things weren't great at home. What we know is that Harley was actually diagnosed with Asperger's as a child, and then he got PTSD from being repeatedly beaten by his older sister. He was incredibly dependent and needed things in a very specific way, which could have been difficult a lot of the time. His mother even posted about how she didn't want kids, leading many to speculate. It's kind of like, why would you not check on or worry for your 14-year-old who had a fear of grass and needed to shower 4 times a day? They actually took away his cell phone, so it's not like he could have called for help. Today, there are still so many unanswered questions in Harley's case, and I think one of the biggest reasons why is because him going up that ladder to go back down the chimney just doesn't make sense. But then again, I also wouldn't think it would make sense for someone to haul a kid up a TV antenna in broad daylight and then throw him down said chimney. On this one, let me know what you guys think.